In a quiet diner, Lena, a single mother with a heart full of compassion, finds herself drawn to Jamie, a mysterious young boy who appears night after night, seeking warmth and safety. As she takes him into her home, secrets unravel, revealing that Jamie is the missing son of a powerful, wealthy man haunted by guilt. With danger closing in and choices that could change their lives forever, Lena must decide. Can she protect Jamie from his past? Will Jamie ever find the true family he's searching for? Or will his father's reach take it all away? Lena's day was like any other long shift in the cramped, slightly run-down diner on the corner of 5th and Oak. She'd been working there for years, serving coffee to regulars and the odd traveler, every hour a steady stream of cups and plates. To those around her, she was known as a calm, steady presence, a woman who kept things moving without fuss, despite working 2 jobs and raising her 10-year-old son, Max, alone. But that evening, something shifted. She was closing up, wiping down tables and checking the register, when she noticed a young boy in the farthest booth. He was small, with shaggy brown hair falling over his eyes, and a coat that was too big for his thin frame. Lena hadn't seen him come in, and he looked out of place in a way that stirred her concern. What was a child doing alone in a nearly empty diner at this hour? Trying not to startle him, Lena approached the boy with a gentle smile. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly. "Where's your family?" But the boy only looked up at her with wide, cautious eyes, clutching his bowl of soup like it was his last meal. His name, she found out with some effort, was Jamie, but he refused to say much else. Not who he was or why he was alone, just Jamie. Lena's heart ached as she watched him shiver slightly under his oversized coat. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and so it became a routine. Each evening for the next week, Jamie would appear in the diner, sitting quietly in the back, ordering only a bowl of soup and never lingering long. He was so reserved, so silent, that it almost seemed like he was trying to disappear into the background. She'd catch him staring out the window sometimes, his gaze far off, and she wondered what stories hid behind those sad eyes. What was he running from? Then one bitterly cold night, as Lena walked out of the diner after closing up, she saw Jamie lying on a park bench nearby, curled up, clutching his thin coat tightly around himself. A wave of alarm shot through her. She hurried over, shaking him gently, her voice trembling with concern. "Jamie, you can't stay out here. It's freezing. Come home with me for tonight. You'll catch your death out here." Jamie looked at her for a long moment, like he was weighing something, but finally nodded, exhaustion in his eyes. She led him to her small apartment, where her son, Max, was already fast asleep, oblivious to the newcomer. That night, Jamie slept soundly on the old, lumpy couch, his face soft and unguarded in sleep, a vulnerability that tugged at Lena's heart. Over the next few days, Jamie settled in quietly, becoming a shadow in their small, busy household. Max, excited to have someone his age around, was thrilled to show Jamie his toys, sharing stories and laughter in a way Lena hadn't seen in a long time. Slowly, Jamie seemed to warm to them, but every now and then, Lena would catch him pulling away, slipping into a distant gaze. Lena sensed that Jamie was holding something back, a hidden fear lurking behind his quiet demeanor. And one evening, while tidying up his things, she found something that stopped her cold. Hidden in the pocket of Jamie's oversized coat was a folded, worn newspaper clipping. She unfolded it carefully, her hands shaking slightly as she read the headline, "Wealthy Boy Missing. Family Desperately Seeks Return of Lost Son." The photo of Jamie, looking both younger and somehow happier, stared up at her. Her heart pounded as she pieced it together. Jamie hadn't just run away. He'd fled a world of privilege, a place she could barely imagine. But why? What had made him leave behind a life so different from her own and seek refuge in a small diner, hiding his identity as if his life depended on it? Conflicted and shaken, Lena couldn't bring herself to confront him that night. She tossed and turned, thinking of the loving way Max had welcomed Jamie, of Jamie's quiet, fragile acceptance of the warmth and security she offered. The boy was hiding from something, that much was clear. But was it simply homesickness or something far darker? In the days that followed, Jamie's behavior began to change subtly. He became more guarded, sometimes flinching when the doorbell rang or when the phone buzzed with an unexpected call. Lena couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was chasing Jamie, some shadow from his past. And now, as she looked into his sad, weary eyes, she had a choice to make. Would she give him up to the life he seemed so desperate to escape? Or would she keep him close, at risk of whatever consequences lay in store? But as Lena stood there, watching Jamie play with Max as if he'd finally found something he'd never had, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't turn her back on him, no matter what. The days seemed to take on a new rhythm, one that felt almost like a family routine. Jamie was still a quiet shadow in the household, but he'd grown closer to Max, who adored having him around. Together, the boys created a kind of sibling bond, playing and laughing in ways Lena hadn't seen in years. Max, lively and curious, made it his personal mission to pull Jamie out of his shell. If Jamie felt overwhelmed, he didn't show it, always managing a small smile when Max shared one of his silly jokes. However, the growing comfort in their small apartment didn't erase the concerns gnawing at Lena. She'd been checking the local news obsessively, hoping for some kind of update, some reassurance that no one was still looking for Jamie. Yet her stomach twisted every time a headline about a missing child flashed across the screen, even if it wasn't him. She worried that sooner or later Jamie's past would come crashing into their lives. One day, Lena decided it was time to talk with Jamie directly. She found him in the living room, carefully arranging a puzzle with Max. She waited until Max got distracted in the other room, then took a seat across from Jamie. The boy looked up, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, fear, or maybe resignation in his eyes. He knew this conversation had been coming. "Jamie," Lena started gently, her voice soft but firm, "I know you've been through a lot, and I want to help you. But I need to know, what are you running from?" Jamie's gaze dropped to the floor, his fingers twisting the hem of his too-big sweater. He was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't happy there. With my dad," he said, each word laced with a heaviness far beyond his years. He glanced up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that caught her off guard. "It wasn't like here." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lena prompted gently. Jamie swallowed, his small face drawn with a mix of reluctance and pain. "My dad, he wasn't a bad person." "Not really," Jamie explained slowly, as if trying to convince himself. "But he was never there. He only talked to me when he wanted something." He looked away, blinking hard. "Mom was different. She cared about little things, like how my day went or if I was feeling okay. But she's gone." The sorrow in his voice pierced Lena. She reached over and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. Jamie continued, "After she died, Dad didn't know what to do with me. He just wanted me to be like him, to be tough and smart and successful. But he never smiled, never hugged me, not like you do with Max." Lena's heart broke a little, realizing how deeply Jamie yearned for simple, everyday affection, the kind of love that doesn't ask for perfection. It was clear that Jamie had fled not just loneliness, but a life where he felt invisible, unseen for who he truly was. "I understand, Jamie," she said softly, the words warm but serious, "and I'm here for you, for as long as you need me." But as Jamie finally opened up, telling her about the strict routines, the cold mansion that felt more like a museum, and his father's dismissive words, Lena's heart grew heavier. She felt an ache, a desire to protect this boy who had found his way into her life. Yet, she knew there were limits. She could keep him safe for now, but his father's world was bound to catch up with him eventually. Then, one cold evening, as she sat at the kitchen table after tucking the boys in, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her old friend Sarah, who worked for a local attorney's office. "Lena, I need to talk to you. Something important. Call me back as soon as you can." Lena's stomach flipped. Sarah was usually casual in her texts, never serious like this. She quickly dialed back, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the call button. "Lena?" Sarah's voice came through, tense and hurried. "I heard something today at the office. There's a case out of state, a missing persons case for a boy who sounds an awful lot like Jamie. He's the son of a wealthy businessman, and they're offering a huge reward for any information leading to his return." Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She clenched her phone tighter, whispering, "So they're still looking for him?" "Yes, and they're not giving up," Sarah continued. "Lena, you could get in trouble if they find out you've been hiding him. His father's pulling every string he can to find him. I just thought you needed to know." As she hung up the phone, Lena felt torn. The warmth and safety of her home, which had finally started to feel complete with Jamie there, suddenly seemed fragile, as if a strong wind could tear it all apart. She knew what this meant. If Jamie's father discovered where he was, he'd be taken away, and there was no way of knowing if Jamie would ever find the love and stability he needed. But if she kept him here, she was risking everything: her own security, Max's stability, and potentially even the fragile trust Jamie had placed in her. Over the next few days, Lena wrestled with what to do, feeling a growing sense of dread. She tried to act as though everything was normal for the boy's sake, but Jamie sensed the change. He grew quieter, almost as if he was pulling back into himself, as though he too could feel something looming. Then one afternoon, while they were out at the park, Lena noticed a tall man lingering near the entrance, watching them. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him, a private investigator she'd once seen at the courthouse. She quickly gathered the boys, urging them toward the car, masking her anxiety with a forced smile. But the man's gaze followed them, sharp and assessing, as they hurried past. The ride home was quiet, the boys sensing her tension but too polite to ask. That evening, while Jamie was busy reading with Max, Lena locked herself in the bathroom, her hands gripping the edges of the sink as she stared into the mirror. She couldn't let them take Jamie, not after everything he'd been through. But how could she fight a man with money, power, and every legal advantage? Just as she was reaching her breaking point, she heard a soft knock on the bathroom door. It was Jamie. He looked up at her with those sad brown eyes, and she knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. "Jamie," she whispered, voice trembling, "someone might be looking for you, and I don't know if I can keep you safe if they find us." He didn't cry, didn't even look surprised. Instead, he reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's okay, Lena," he murmured, voice small but steady. "I knew this couldn't last forever, but thank you for making me feel like I belonged." In that moment, Lena realized that Jamie's time with them was running out. The life they'd built together, fragile, precious, would soon be put to the test, and all she could do was brace herself for the fight that lay ahead. The tension hung thick over the small apartment as days slipped by. Jamie's face, once open and just beginning to hold a trace of joy, had become guarded, his smile a rare, fleeting thing. Lena could feel the pressure mounting. She'd even heard whispers among the diner's regulars about the investigator hanging around town, asking questions, subtly showing a photograph that looked eerily like Jamie's young face. It was only a matter of time. One night, when Lena returned home after her shift, she found Jamie standing by the window, staring out at the street below, his small shoulders tense. He looked like he was listening for something, waiting. She stepped in quietly, watching him for a moment, her heart aching with the instinctive need to protect him, to keep him safe. But Jamie's shoulders slumped, his face lost in shadows, as if he, too, could sense the end nearing. "Lena," Jamie said softly without turning around, "I think it's time for me to go." His words cut through her, and she felt the air thicken with the weight of his simple, painful statement. Her instincts screamed against it, against letting him face the world alone. She shook her head. "Jamie, no. We can find a way to keep you safe here. You don't have to leave." Jamie turned to her then, his expression strangely calm for a boy his age, his face etched with a wisdom far beyond his years. "If I stay, they'll find me, and then they'll take me away. I don't want that. I don't want them to drag me back to that house." His voice cracked and he paused, biting his lip. "But maybe if I go on my own, I can find a way to stay close." Lena reached out and held his hand, squeezing it tightly. "No, Jamie, you're not alone anymore. I won't let you just leave like this." But as she spoke, she knew deep down that the choice might not be hers to make. His father's money, his connections, everything about the situation felt insurmountable. She was one woman, standing alone against a force that could take Jamie away with the stroke of a pen. That night, Lena barely slept. She lay awake, her mind racing with plans, ideas, each more desperate than the last. Then, sometime after midnight, her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Sarah. The words sent a chill through her spine. "Private investigator knows Jamie is with you. They'll be there by morning. Prepare yourself." The finality of it hit her like a punch. Tomorrow they'd come. Tomorrow, her home, her quiet life with Max and Jamie would be torn apart. She sat in the dark kitchen, clutching the phone, the words a blur before her eyes. She had to act fast if she wanted any chance of keeping Jamie safe. Just then, Jamie appeared at the kitchen door, rubbing his eyes sleepily, yet somehow aware of her inner turmoil. "Lena, are they coming for me?" Unable to hide the truth any longer, Lena nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, Jamie, they're coming tomorrow." He didn't flinch, but there was a sadness in his eyes that broke her heart all over again. "Then I'll go tonight," he whispered. "Maybe if I'm not here, they'll leave you and Max alone." Lena was about to protest when an idea formed, a desperate last-chance plan that might just work. She grabbed his hands, looking him in the eyes, her voice steady but urgent. "No, Jamie, listen to me. We'll leave together tonight. Max, you and I, just for a while, until we can figure something out. Do you trust me?" Jamie nodded without hesitation, his relief visible even in the dim light. Together, they quickly packed a small bag for each of them, Lena moving silently as she packed essentials for Max as well. She woke her son gently, whispering to him, explaining as best she could. Max, drowsy and confused, didn't ask questions. He simply trusted her, clutching her hand as they hurried down the apartment stairs into the chilly night. They slipped into Lena's old car, the tires crunching over gravel as they pulled out of the parking lot and into the darkness. She drove for hours, the small towns and streetlights flashing by, until they reached a small, quiet motel on the edge of a distant town. It was far from home, but for now, it was safe, or so she hoped. In the morning, as the sun rose, Lena felt the exhaustion catch up with her. She turned to Jamie, who was watching her from the bed in the cramped motel room, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you, Lena," he whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I didn't think anyone would fight for me like this." Lena brushed his hair back, smiling through her own exhaustion. "You're family now, Jamie, and family doesn't give up." She wanted to believe her words, to trust in this fragile plan, but a part of her knew this was only a temporary solution. They could only hide for so long. Their fragile peace shattered that afternoon. As they ventured out to get groceries, a flash of recognition crossed a stranger's face. A face that, to her horror, she recognized from the diner. It was the investigator. He had found them. Panic surged through her, and she grabbed Jamie's hand, pulling him toward the car. But as they raced through the parking lot, the investigator called out, his voice loud, commanding, "Lena, you can't hide him forever. His father is waiting. This is your last chance to come quietly." The words cut through the air like a blade, sending Jamie into a fearful silence. Lena turned, her face set with determination. She looked at the investigator, fire in her eyes. "I'm not letting you take him, not unless you can promise he'll be safe, truly safe." The investigator's expression softened just slightly. "His father isn't a bad man, Lena. He's desperate. He knows he's made mistakes. He just wants to make it right." The tone of the man's voice seemed genuine, as if even he believed the words he was saying. Jamie clung to her, silent, and Lena could feel him trembling. She hesitated, torn between the fear of losing him and the knowledge that, realistically, they couldn't keep running forever. Then Jamie spoke, his voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "He doesn't love me. Not like you do, Lena. He just wants me to be like him. I'll never be that." The investigator watched them, something shifting in his expression. He seemed to sense the pain radiating from Jamie, the fear that had driven him to hide, to run. He took a slow breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "If I can get his father to promise counseling, visits, whatever it takes to make sure Jamie's happy and safe, would you trust me?" Lena looked down at Jamie, his young face twisted with anguish. She didn't want to betray him, to leave him vulnerable, but deep down, she knew that Jamie deserved stability. a life free from hiding and fear. She knelt down, looking Jamie in the eye. "If he promises, Jamie, would you be willing to try? I'll be there with you every step of the way." Jamie hesitated, eyes darting between her and the investigator. Finally, he nodded, though his hand still clung tightly to hers. "I'll try. For you, Lena." The investigator promised to arrange a gradual transition, one that would allow Jamie to stay connected to Lena, to keep the family he had found. Lena hoped, as she held Jamie's hand tightly, that this would be enough, that it would give him the life he deserved. But her heart still ached, knowing this was only the beginning of another chapter, one filled with uncertainties. The days following the tense encounter with the investigator were filled with a cautious hope. Lena, though torn inside, clung to the promise of a gradual, compassionate transition for Jamie. She kept him close, doing everything in her power to ensure that he felt safe and loved, all while preparing for what lay ahead. It was a fragile peace, a time suspended between fear and hope, and yet, somehow, it allowed Jamie to be a boy again, if only briefly. True to his word, the investigator had arranged a formal meeting with Jamie's father, Andrew Foster, at a small family counselor's office in a neutral town. Lena's stomach twisted with a mixture of dread and determination as she and Jamie prepared for the day. She'd taken Max to stay with a friend, wanting to shield him from the emotions that the meeting would inevitably stir. On the drive to the counselor's office, Jamie sat quietly, staring out the window, his small hands clenched together in his lap. She reached over, giving his hand a comforting squeeze, offering him silent reassurance. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and gave her a small nod of understanding. She was here with him, and that for the moment seemed to be enough. When they arrived, Andrew Foster was already waiting in the counselor's office, his tall, imposing figure softened slightly by a nervous, almost apologetic air. Lena felt her heart quicken as she sized him up, a man who'd once terrified his own son into running away. But today, he looked different. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a subtle slouch in his shoulders. He looked more like a father lost than a figure of power. Jamie hesitated at the door, and Lena gently placed a hand on his back, guiding him forward. They took their seats across from Andrew, who cleared his throat awkwardly, his eyes darting between his son and Lena. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying a vulnerability Lena hadn't expected. "Jamie," he began, swallowing hard, I don't know how to say this, except that I know I've failed you. When she passed, I didn't know how to be there for you." His voice cracked slightly, and he took a moment to compose himself. "I thought if I could make you strong, make you successful, then you'd be able to handle anything. But I was wrong. I can see that now." Jamie sat, frozen, his gaze fixed on a spot on the carpet. Lena could feel his inner turmoil, the way he battled with the desire to forgive and the deep-seated hurt he'd carried for so long. She held her breath, wondering if this could be enough, if Andrew's words would reach him. "Jamie," Andrew continued, his voice growing softer, "I want to make things right. I'm not expecting you to just come home and pretend everything's okay. I know it's not that simple, but I'd like the chance to be the father you deserve, however long it takes." The counselor stepped in, encouraging Jamie to share his thoughts. The boy shifted, glancing at Lena for reassurance, and she offered him a supportive nod. Slowly, Jamie found his voice, though it trembled with the weight of his words. "I was so lonely," he admitted, his eyes filling with tears. After she was gone, you stopped caring about me. It was like I didn't even matter." The pain in his voice pierced the room, and Lena felt her own tears rise. But to her surprise, Andrew didn't turn away. He nodded, his face etched with remorse. "I know, Jamie, and I'm so sorry. I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to show you that you do matter. To me, more than anything." They continued, exchanging truths that had been buried for years, all with the counselor's gentle guidance. For the first time, Jamie was given the space to share his pain openly, and Andrew was there to listen, to absorb each word with humility and regret. It was as though a bridge was finally being built, one fragile word at a time. After an emotional hour, the counselor turned to Lena, asking her thoughts on the proposed arrangement. a gradual reintroduction with weekly visits, then weekend stays, all depending on Jamie's comfort. Lena's heart ached, but she knew that this was what Jamie needed. A chance to mend his relationship with his father, to heal the parts of himself that had been fractured by years of neglect. She nodded, giving Jamie a reassuring smile. "I'll be here for you, every step of the way, Jamie. You'll always have a home with us." Jamie reached out, clutching her hand with a strength that belied his small frame. "Thank you, Lena," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. You're my family, too." Andrew looked at them, a strange blend of gratitude and sorrow in his eyes. "Lena," he said, his voice steady, "thank you for taking care of my son when I couldn't. I can never repay you for what you've done." Lena held his gaze, her voice unwavering. "All I ask is that you keep your word. Jamie deserves nothing less." The months that followed were a time of adjustment for everyone. Jamie would spend the weekdays with Lena and Max, slipping back into the familiar rhythm they had created together. Then, on weekends, he'd visit his father, cautiously building a new foundation for their relationship. Andrew kept his promises, attending every counseling session, striving to understand his son and slowly shedding the armor of his once hardened exterior. Max missed Jamie whenever he left, but Lena encouraged him, explaining that Jamie was lucky to have both a friend and a father who wanted to make things right. "He'll be back, Max," she'd say, ruffling his hair. "He's just got a bigger family now." One weekend, after Jamie had been with his father, he returned to Lena's house, his face alight with an excitement she hadn't seen in him before. "Lena, Dad wants to meet you all for dinner. He says it's important." Unsure of what to expect, Lena agreed. And that Sunday, they met Andrew at a cozy family restaurant. He looked more relaxed, even smiling as he greeted them. After they'd ordered, he cleared his throat, glancing at Jamie, then back at Lena. "I've been thinking about how I can show you just how grateful I am," he began, his tone sincere. "Jamie needs both of you in his life. You, Lena, and you, Max." He glanced at his son. "So, I'd like us to work together, to be a family. However that looks, however it works, I want to be part of it." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of joy and bittersweet relief. Jamie was beaming, and she could see the glimmer of hope in his face, a hope she'd never thought possible when he'd first appeared in her life. As they all shared that meal together, Lena felt a warmth settle over her. They were an unconventional family, brought together by circumstance and struggle, but a family nonetheless. Over time, their arrangement evolved. Jamie spent time between both homes, thriving as he finally received the love and stability he'd longed for. Andrew became a more present father, working to prove to Jamie each day that he'd changed, that he truly wanted to be there. And Lena? She became not just a caregiver, but a constant in Jamie's life, a person he could turn to no matter what, a second mother who'd shown him that love, in all its imperfect forms, was real. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story from HeroKind Stories. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of resilience and connection, and don't forget to share with someone who believes in the power of family and kindness. If you enjoyed this journey, join us for another inspiring story coming up on your screen now, one that might just touch your heart and remind you of the beauty in second chances.